General Omar Bradley was not supposed to be watching a parade. He was supposed to be working through the final coordination documents for the most complex military operation in history, which was scheduled to launch in less than 6 weeks. Instead, he was standing at his office window in late April 1944, field glasses raised, staring at a full division of infantry moving through central London in broad daylight. His first reaction was professional alarm. Every movement order in southern England had been written with a single priority: preventing German intelligence from reading the scale of the Allied buildup from troop movements, unit concentrations, or any other observable indicator. Strict movement discipline and dispersal had been emphasized repeatedly at every command level, and here was an entire division marching in formation through the capital city in the middle of the afternoon. He reached for his phone. Before he could pick it up, his aide, Captain David Phillips, knocked and entered with the expression of a man who had anticipated this moment. "Sir, the Canadian division moving through Westminster." "Yes," Bradley said. "Explain." Phillips had been working Allied liaison coordination for months and had developed a careful feel for the sensitivities involved. He chose his words accordingly. "The movement isn't actually a security breach, sir. The 3rd Canadian Division is repositioning from assembly areas in northern England to embarkation points on the southern coast. The Westminster route was selected by British transport planning as the most efficient path given current rail capacity and road conditions throughout the South." Bradley lowered the field glasses. "That explains the movement. It doesn't explain the formation marching. They could move through the city in dispersed trucks and attract a fraction of this attention." "Yes, sir. General Keller made the decision that since they had to pass through London regardless, they would do it in proper formation. There's also a morale consideration that British liaison has mentioned to me. Many of these soldiers have been stationed in England since 1940. For some of them, this march represents the first visible confirmation that the waiting is ending and the operation is finally coming." Bradley turned back to the window. 4 years, he had known this as a fact, that Canada had entered the war in September 1939, more than 2 years before Pearl Harbor, and that Canadian forces had been stationed in Britain since 1940. He had processed this information without fully weighing what it meant for the soldiers involved. 4 years of training and waiting in a foreign country, watching other forces go to combat while they remained at garrison, preparing for an operation whose timing remained beyond their control. "How has that affected their readiness?" Bradley asked. 4 years is a long time. I'd expect morale problems and staleness." Phillips considered the question. "There have been morale challenges from the inactivity, sir, but the extended time has also allowed for a level of training preparation that no other Allied force has matched. Canadian units have conducted more practice amphibious assaults, more combined arms exercises, more coordination training with naval and air forces than any American unit has had time to complete. They've been preparing specifically for this invasion for years." Bradley was quiet for a moment, looking at the troops through the glasses again. Now that he was observing rather than reacting, he noticed things his initial irritation had obscured. The formations were tight, intervals exact, movement synchronized in the way that only comes from extensive drill. These were not garrison soldiers performing a ceremonial function. They were troops carrying full combat loads, weapons, packs, ammunition, maintaining formation discipline through urban terrain, the way professional soldiers move through any terrain, with purpose, with precision, without wasted motion. Arrange for me to observe some Canadian training exercises, Bradley said. I want a first-hand assessment of their readiness. If they've been training for 4 years, they should be among the most proficient forces we have. I want to verify that. Over the following week, Bradley visited several Canadian training facilities. What he observed confirmed and expanded what Phillips had told him, and then went considerably further. The amphibious assault training was what struck him first, and most forcefully. Canadian forces had been conducting practice beach landings in systematic repetition, incorporating lessons learned from the Dieppe raid of 1942. Lessons purchased at severe cost that had then been studied, analyzed, and embedded into every level of Canadian training doctrine. Their procedures for moving from landing craft through surf to the beach to inland objectives had been refined through iteration until they had the character of deeply practiced skills rather than recently learned techniques. Coordination with naval gunfire was sophisticated and rehearsed. Specialized armor for breaching beach obstacles had been integrated into combined arms procedures in ways that showed genuine tactical innovation. Bradley watched a Canadian infantry battalion conduct a simulated beach assault and found himself studying it with the attention he gave to genuinely impressive military performance. Platoons moved in proper bounds with covering fire. Engineers cleared obstacles efficiently. Radio communications between elements were crisp. The entire sequence had a flow that required extensive practice to achieve, and that was unmistakable once you had seen enough training to recognize the difference between adequate preparation and genuine mastery. Afterward, he spoke with the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew McPherson, who had been in England since 1940. Colonel, how many times have your troops practiced these specific procedures? McPherson thought for a moment. This battalion has conducted full-scale amphibious assault exercises approximately 40 times over the past 18 months, sir. That's in addition to smaller-scale work on specific tasks, obstacle breaching, assault boat handling, fire coordination. We've been preparing for this mission for years, and we intend to get it right. 40 full-scale exercises. Bradley had commanded American units that had conducted perhaps 4 or 5 before deploying to combat. The Canadian commitment to repetitive practice until procedures became instinctive represented a philosophy of preparation that he had not encountered at this scale. He asked about training casualties. 40 live exercises against simulated defenses must have produced accidents. McPherson's expression became measured. We've had some, yes, a few men killed in training, more injured. We accepted that as the cost of preparing properly. Better to find problems and learn procedures when mistakes can be corrected than to discover them in combat where they cost lives and lose missions. The men who died in training gave something so that the men going ashore in June would know what they were doing. This philosophy, accepting training risk to reduce combat casualty rates, was harder-edged than American training doctrine typically embraced. Bradley could see the operational logic clearly. Realistic training that occasionally produced accidents created soldiers who performed under pressure without hesitation. Sanitized training that eliminated all risk also eliminated the stress responses that combat would demand. Bradley's observations expanded over the following days to other operational areas. He watched Canadian artillery units demonstrate fire support procedures, the speed and accuracy of response, the integration between forward observers and gun lines, and was struck by how seamlessly the coordination functioned. He observed combined arms training and noted how naturally tank crews and infantry operated in close proximity, the kind of reflexive mutual support that develops from extended practice together. He reviewed logistics and maintenance operations and found them thoroughly professional. A consistent pattern emerged across everything he observed. Canadian forces had used their years in Britain to build systematic expertise across the full range of modern military operations. They had studied the combat experiences of other nations, had incorporated lessons from campaigns they had not participated in, had practiced until skills became instinctive, and had created an institutional culture that treated professional military excellence not as an aspiration, but as a standard. He discussed his observations at a commanders' conference in early May. Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges raised the natural objection when Bradley offered his assessment. Superior to American units in some areas? We've been fighting in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy while they've been training in Britain. Combat experience should count for more than training exercises. Bradley had expected this and had thought through his answer. Combat experience is genuinely valuable. It's also exhausting, casualty-producing, and disruptive to unit cohesion. The Canadians have used their time here to build fresh forces that are rested, motivated, and trained specifically for this operation. They've absorbed lessons from others' combat experience without paying the casualty cost that usually accompanies that learning. I'm not suggesting we change our approach to training. I'm observing that years of focused preparation for a single specific mission has created forces with exceptional proficiency in exactly the tasks they'll perform during the invasion. General J. Lawton Collins, who would lead 7th Corps at Utah Beach, added his own assessment. The Canadian liaison officers I've worked with in planning are sharp and well prepared. If their soldiers are what Bradley is describing, they should be reliable partners. Bradley's guidance to the group was direct. Treat them as fully capable allies. They have their own command structure, their own operational plans, and from everything I've observed, they're completely capable of executing those plans. They don't need oversight or supervision. They need coordination. The weeks before D-Day brought Bradley into repeated contact with Canadian forces and commanders. He reviewed Canadian operational plans for Juno Beach and found them thoroughly developed and realistically ambitious. Plans that reflected genuine understanding of the challenges the terrain and the defenses would present, and genuine confidence in the capability to overcome them. One interaction stayed with him after the war was over. He had visited a Canadian infantry company conducting final equipment checks and spoke informally with some of the soldiers. One private from Saskatchewan who had arrived in England in 1940 expressed something Bradley recognized as genuine. "Sir, we've been waiting 4 years for this. 4 years of training and preparing and watching other forces go into combat while we stayed here. Some people back home think we've been avoiding the fight. We haven't been avoiding anything. We've been getting ready. When we hit that beach, we're going to show everyone what Canadian soldiers can do. We've got 4 years of frustration and determination pushing us forward." Bradley replied simply, "Son, I believe you will. I've seen how you and your comrades have prepared. You're ready for this. Give them everything you have and come home safe. D-Day was June 6, 1944. Bradley spent the day at his headquarters processing reports from all sectors. Omaha Beach was catastrophic in its early hours. American forces pinned under fire, taking losses that at one point made Allied commanders consider abandoning the assault entirely and redirecting follow-on forces elsewhere. Utah Beach was progressing but fighting hard. The British beaches were achieving objectives against resistance. At Juno Beach, Canadian forces had hit the beach in the wrong tidal conditions, landing among German obstacles that inflicted severe losses on the landing craft before soldiers reached the shore. The initial assault had been violent and costly. Then the report started showing something else. Canadian forces had breached the defenses, secured the beach, and were moving inland. By late morning, they were farther inland than American forces at either Utah or Omaha. By evening, the operational map showed Canadian penetrations averaging 9 to 10 kilometers, farther than any other Allied force on the first day of the invasion. They had accomplished virtually all their D-Day objectives. Bradley studied the map for a long time. He called Eisenhower that evening to give his operational summary. When he reached the Canadian sector, he was direct. "Ike, the Canadians have done brilliantly. They pushed farther inland than any other force, despite facing tough resistance in the initial assault. Their preparation paid off exactly as their training was designed to ensure it would. They deserve full recognition for what they accomplished today." Eisenhower had been receiving similar reports from British command. His response carried something beyond the routine acknowledgement of operational success. "Omar, I appreciate that you took the time before the invasion to observe Canadian forces and develop an accurate assessment of their capabilities. Too many officers assume we're inherently superior to other Allied forces without actually evaluating what those forces bring. Your willingness to look carefully and assess honestly has given us a more accurate understanding of this coalition." Bradley acknowledged the observation and added an honest qualification. "Sir, I'll be direct. I started with some of those same assumptions about American superiority. It was direct observation that forced me to revise my thinking. They earned respect through their professionalism and their accomplishments. In the years after the war, when asked about Canadian forces, Bradley was consistent and specific in ways that went beyond diplomatic generosity. In one post-war interview, asked directly to compare Canadian and American forces, he gave the kind of answer that reflected genuine professional assessment, rather than carefully managed coalition politics. "The Canadians I worked with were professional, capable, and reliable. They accomplished every mission assigned to them. In specific areas, amphibious assault, artillery coordination, certain specialized operations, they were more proficient than many American units because they had trained more extensively in those specific tasks. Were they better than American forces overall? That's not a meaningful question because different forces had different strengths, but they were equals in every way that mattered militarily. That's not a diplomatic observation. That's what I saw. The process that had produced that assessment had begun on a Tuesday afternoon in late April 1944, when Bradley had stood at his window watching troops he didn't expect to be impressed by marching through London with a precision that made him lower his field glasses and reach for the phone to arrange a visit. What he found when he arrived had changed how he understood the war he was fighting and the people he was fighting it alongside.